Welcome to this Marxist Workers Party discussion.
Today we are discussing the open letter that the MWP recently published to the membership of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, Saftu, ahead of their National Executive Committee, which began on the 25th of August. We'll also be discussing the outcome of that meeting. Now, we published the open letter in three parts. Part one appeared on the 18th of August, and parts 2 and 3 on the 22nd and 24th of August, respectively. The Saftu NEC began the day after. Now, I'm joined today by two other comrades from the Marxist Workers Party, Comrade Wiseman Hamilton, who is the General Secretary of the party, and Comrade Executive Mkwevo, who is a member of our Executive Committee and is also, in the workers' movement, the provincial coordinator for the Gauteng EPWP Workers' Forum. And we're going to discuss the open letter and the Saftu NEC outcome together. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to bring Wiseman straight in and ask you, Wiseman, can you explain to us and to our listeners and viewers what exactly is an open letter and why did we write it to Saftu at this time in the run-up to their NEC meeting?
We decided to take the unusual step of writing an open letter to the membership of Saftu in view of the fact that certain developments within the Federation had demonstrated to us that there was serious cause for alarm over whether or not the leadership of Saftu, upon whom an enormous responsibility had been thrust when the Federation was brought into existence in 2017, had not thoroughly grasped the gravity of the economic and flowing from that, the political crisis in the country, and in particular, had not addressed itself to the expectations that the workers who launched the Federation had of them. We had become concerned also that there were many discussions that were taking place at the level of the leadership from which the ordinary members of Saftu and its affiliates were excluded. And we felt it was our bounden duty as a revolutionary Marxist party to draw the attention of the membership to this debate, to bring the historical and collective wisdom of the working class into these discussions, to be able to exercise their influence over the direction of the debates by evaluating the contents of those discussions in the light of the expectations with which the Federation was launched in 2017. Because these discussions were not being communicated to the membership, the crisis was deepening at an economic, social, and political level without any sign of direction coming from the leadership at all. On the contrary, we received alarming reports that that implied that what was being contemplated, at least by sections of the leadership, was the actual suspension of the functioning of Saftu by the indefinite postponement, we were told, until the end of COVID, whenever that might be, of the operations of the National Executive Committee, the general staff of the army that the working class believed it had created in 2017. And for this reason, we believed it was necessary to arm the working class with the knowledge of these debates, but also to share with the working class our analysis of these developments in the hope that this will rescue Saftu. And that is the reason that we felt it was necessary to bring the attention of the workers to these developments so that they could take a step in reclaiming, in the name of that sacred principle by which our movement, the workers' movement, had sworn from the beginning, of worker control and workers' democracy within the trade union movement.
Can you explain, though, why did we single out Saftu? There are 4 main trade union federations in South Africa, but we addressed the open letter to Saftu specifically. Can you explain why we did that?
Well, we have always been supportive of Saftu. And in fact, we are very proud of our record in the process that led to the formation of Saftu itself, because particularly in the light of the Marikana massacre, which in our view represented a political fault line separating 2 important historical periods, a period during which the working class had hopes and expectations out of the ANC government, but had gradually begun to draw the conclusion that the ANC is the party of a different class, not the party of the working class they had believed they had put into power to begin with. And that conclusion reached a decisive stage of clarity as a result of the Marikana massacre, that the ANC government had demonstrated through that action that it was the party of mining capital, firstly and foremostly, but also of the capitalist class as a whole. And out of that, the conclusion began to set in amongst the advanced layers of the working class that it was necessary for them to rearm themselves politically, and for that purpose to create a workers' party. And alongside that, to remove Cosatu from the to break up the tripartite alliance. And therefore, the birth of Saftu represented an historic step forward for the working class in South Africa. Unfortunately, since its launch, and despite initial very promising developments, such as the Section 77 strike that took place in April of 2018, and equally significantly, the convening of a working class summit in July of that year, a summit that attracted 1,000 delegates from 147 different community and trade union organizations, and which had concluded with the adoption of a resolution for the establishment of a mass workers' party on a socialist program. That the reality is that since those promising developments, paralysis appeared to have set in within the federation. One of the consequences of which, of course, is that those workers who had become frustrated with the betrayals of the Cosatu leadership in the different affiliates had been looking towards Saftu in great expectation, saw no reason in the direction that Saftu was taking for them to break out of Cosatu and to move over to Saftu. And the same thing, incidentally, applies also to those workers in other federations who had hoped that Saftu, in the way in which the early Cosatu had acted as a central point of reference for the organized working class in both workplace struggles as well as on the political plane, that Saftu had not met those expectations. And that is why we believed it was necessary at this critical juncture, when the crisis within the ruling capitalist parties, by the way, the ANC first and foremost, as the events of the past weekends have demonstrated yet again, being torn apart by a factional struggle that can end in victory for either faction only at the expense of the breaking up of the ANC in the medium to long term. The crisis within the DA, the corruption allegations against the leadership of the EFF, that on the political plane, it was clear that the working class had no alternative in circumstances, by the way, where the level of anger towards the ANC as party and government had surpassed the levels that had been manifested during the anti-Zuma corruption protests a few years ago. That you have hashtags my useless ANC, and so forth, indicating a desire for an alternative. And what we had, unfortunately, is no apprehension on the part of the leadership of Saftu that they had to address this matter as a question of urgency.
Well, from what you're saying, you could say that we wrote the open letter because we see the enormous potential in Saftu and are determined to see that potential realised. We outline a lot of this in the open letter, of course, but I just want to quote something from part 1 of the open letter where, addressing ourselves to the Saftu leadership after outlining the economic and political crisis, we say the following. This is why the outcome of Saftu's upcoming NEC is so important. Everything in the situation points to a decisive showdown between the classes developing quickly in the next period. Even the possibility of a pre-revolutionary situation opening up cannot be excluded. We then go on to say, preparations must be made now to place Saftu at the head of the masses in the coming storm of class struggle. So, what we're saying is that we see such potential in Saftu that we're calling on it to place itself at the head of the working class fight back which is lodged in the situation. Now, just to move on a bit, in part 1, we put forward what we hoped to see emerge from the NEC in terms of the way forward for struggle. Now, the ideas that we raised was for Saftu to call for a public sector general strike, for Saftu to call a follow-up Section 77 strike. Section 77, that's a provision in the Labour Relations Act that allows trade union federations to call general strike action over socio-economic and political issues. We also called on Saftu to convene a second working class summit in order to revitalise the Workers' Party process. Now, you mentioned the Workers' Party issue in your contribution just now, and I want to quote again from the open letter on that crucial issue and its relationship to Saftu. So in the open letter, we say the following. Saftu's creation in 2017 was a breakthrough. It was a crucial landmark in the realignment of the trade union movement that was set in motion by the mine workers and the 2012 Marikana massacre. Most of the forces which founded Saftu came from splits within Cosatu. These were driven by the rank and file's growing opposition to the leadership's policies of class collaboration. These were summed up in Cosatu's tripartite alliance with the ANC and the SACP, a mechanism for the policing of the working class and their subordination to the interests of the bosses. The founding of Saftu was an important organisational consolidation of the striving by hundreds of thousands of workers for their organisational, political and ideological class independence. The creation of a Workers' Party would be the highest expression of this process at this point in the class struggle. So, Wiseman, can I get you now to comment on the outcome of the Saftu NEC? They've published a statement. Comrade Varvey read it on Saftu's Facebook channel. What did we get out of the Saftu NEC?
Just before I answer that question directly, just a little bit of a recap of the background against which the Saftu NEC was meeting. Not only did we have the pandemic and the lockdown that followed, but we had an unprecedented attack on the working class in the form of the brazen refusal of the government to implement the third leg of the public sector wage agreement signed in 2018. An attack so serious should have been met with an immediate declaration of commitment to a mobilization to demand that that money be paid in full. But nothing of the sort, unfortunately, had taken place. And by refusing to comply with a signed collective agreement was not just illegal on the part of the government, but it was an open invitation to the capitalist class in the private sector to follow the example set by the government in the state sector. In conditions, by the way, where retrenchments were mounting to the point that we heard even from Secretary General Favi referring to the retrenchments as a bloodbath. And that is why we considered it of such vital importance that this NEC, that it should focus its attention on the most critical tasks before the working class. The necessity for a public sector general strike, a wider general strike through a Section 77 notice, to reconvene the Working Class Summit for the purposes of setting into motion the process of the mobilization of the party of action that the Working Class Summit in 2018 had envisaged this Workers' Party would be, to put it on its feet as a party of action in preparation for arming the working class for the struggle that was lying ahead. Not only was there inaction on the part of the Saftu leadership, but on top of that, recognizing the rapid decline in their own credibility, the leadership of Cosatu, whose members were hoping Saftu would eventually give them reason to abandon in a full exodus, were themselves reacting to the problems not so much faced by the working class, in fact, far less the interests of the working class than the threat to their ability to keep the working class imprisoned within the political and ideological prison of the tripartite alliance, resolving to take action in order to posture that what they were taking action for was to defend the interests of the working class, when all the actions of the Cosatu leadership over decades now were preparing the way precisely for the kind of offensive that its alliance partner, the ANC, was preparing against the working class. We called, in other words, as long ago as 2012, for a new federation, precisely in order to prepare for the crisis that we foresaw was coming for the capitalist system worldwide, but also within South Africa itself. And the pandemic concentrated all the crises into one single event, if you like. And it was necessary, and now an emergency situation facing the working class. I think, just to expand on the position that we have taken, as outlined in the letter, regarding the action that Cosatu is calling. Now that that call has been made, before Saftu itself did, we fully support Saftu's decision to support the action. Not to have done so would have been an act of sectarianism and would have divided the working class. But having taken the decision to support the action, it remains necessary for the leadership to be very clear on what basis they are doing so. In effect, this is an action in line with the principle of striking together but marching separately. It is a version of the united front tactic in the course of strike action. And the purpose of such a tactic is not to unite with the leadership, but to bring about unity between the membership of Saftu and their class brothers and sisters within Cosatu itself. That would then provide, in our view, the proper basis for the re-establishment of the connection that the Saftu leadership ought to have with the rank and file of Cosatu in preparation for the inevitable betrayal of the Cosatu leadership of the struggle of their own members going forward.
Isn't this development with Cosatu, though, the fact that they're calling general strike action on the 7th of October, and we should add, over the past month, it's been Nahau, Cosatu's public sector union, which has taken the lead amongst health workers in fighting on the issue of PPE, which may culminate in strike action in the coming days and week. Isn't that a complete vindication of the warning that we were making? Because we called on Saftu to place itself at the head of the working class fight back, which, like I said just now, is lodged in the situation. Now, it flows from that if Saftu would not be prepared to take that stand, then other forces would fill the vacuum. And that's precisely what has happened. So this is the price of the 5 months of delay in convening the leadership has meant that Saftu's been outflanked now. And just to develop what you've said just now, Wiseman, is in terms of the outcome of Saftu's CEC, there's no mention of the issue of a public sector general strike. Yes, Saftu has applied for a second Section 77, for a new Section 77 application, but there's also no mention of a working class summit and no mention of a workers' party. So unless those issues are addressed, Saftu's going to be stuck as a passenger in a car driven by Cosatu. In parts 2 and 3 of the open letter, in particular, we examined and analysed how it could be that Saftu was missing in inaction for the first 5 months of the lockdown. We shone a light on the main bureaucratic factional rivalries that we believed were paralysing the Federation. Now, and this is a crucial point, we gave a political characterisation to these groups. For us, it is never really about individuals, so we talked about an SACP Mark II grouping that we think has to take the main responsibility for the paralysis in Saftu. The open letter went into a lot of detail about this grouping's conduct over the past 7 years, especially since NUMSA's famous Special National Congress in December 2013. Now, we don't have time to repeat everything that's in the letter, but in summary, we demonstrated, or tried to demonstrate, how, in reality, this SACP2 grouping had been obstructing the forward march of the working class's struggle for its class independence. Now, we made these points, but we also drew attention to what we believe are the mistakes of those in the leadership in opposition to the SACP2 grouping, that this opposition, shows a tendency to avoid open, principled political fights on the issues, accounting to the membership, in front of the membership, and instead rely on their own bureaucratic manoeuvres, what we called in the open letter a policy of not in front of the kids. So instead of trusting the Saftu membership, they have looked for shortcuts and refuge with the middle class. Organisationally, that's meant working with the COVID-19 People's Coalition, a middle-class coalition, dominated coalition of NGOs, charities and so on, and ideologically, some of them, at least, looking to the anti-revolutionary reformist ideas of Keynesianism. Now, it's fair to say that the open letter doesn't mince its words in regards to either grouping in the leadership. We've told it like we see it, and we've told the truth as we see it. Now, I want to turn to Comrade Executive next, because, Comrade, you've been contacted by a Saftu NEC member repeatedly in the past week, in the run-up to the NEC when we began publishing the open letter in the 3 stages, during the NEC meeting itself, and after the NEC meeting. Now, needless to say, these weren't friendly calls, were they, Comrade? We've really ruffled some feathers. So can you explain what we're hearing?
Yeah, thanks, Comrade Sean. You know, yeah, it's correct. A president of one of Saftu's larger affiliates have been actually repeatedly calling me. Yes, we are correct. But those calls were not friendly ones, you see. because the man was furious. And he's furious with what he calls our recklessness in publishing the open letter, you know. Although he has not actually put it like this, but in reality, just trying to intimidate the party, the MWP party. And I should also add this, Comrade Sean, that you know, he's actually opposed to what we have called the SACP2 grouping within you know, Saftu itself. So there is those groupings in Saftu, comrade. Although we came out to you know, determined, I mean, came out of Cosatu determined that you know, we are going to actually do away with that kind of approach to Marxism. But we know now that some of us whom we went out together, they didn't actually, you know, leave everything as we did. They are still bringing those attitudes to the new federation. So you can see that we have actually upset everyone. I mean, so what we said was that these comrades, even though they did not have the main responsibility, were equally terrified to be exposed in front of Saftu's members. What we called, you know, in code, not in front of the kids. These comrades said that Nupso, one of Saftu's affiliates, whom we have been, you know, working with through my position with the EPWP workers, would distance itself from us. So, you know, if it's true, this would have meant a collective, you know, punishment for the EPWP workers, for the political position of the MWP. So, however, this was a weak lie. He was lying. He was actually bluffing. You know. So, you know, further, Comrade Sean, this comrade also, you know, shared with us what the SACP Mark II grouping as response was. You know, even in WhatsApp, so we can actually prove this. Sean, our open letter is described as an attack on the leadership of Saftu, that it is no better than, you know, tavern type kind of gossip. You know, there was a call for us to be banned from all Saftu events. You know, we were described as parasites on Saftu, repeatedly called enemies of Saftu. You know, he said it is also said we want to collapse Saftu and destroy its unity. You would think we were worse than the capitalist class, you know, to do that kind of, you know, things.
No, thanks, Exec. I mean, that's really shocking report that you're giving there. I just want to get clarity on with one quick follow-up question, because you've told us a lot of what we've heard from that's being that the SACP2 grouping has said about our open letter, but also what those opposing the SACP2 grouping have said about our letter, and neither of it is favourable. But can I just ask you, are we hearing any political arguments against anything contained in our open letter? Because I can't hear that yet.
Commission, I tell you, not one single political argument can be made by either side to refute what we have said in our open letter. The open letter, it stands.
Wiseman, let me turn to you. You're the General Secretary of the MWP. If any of the accusations being made against the party and our motivations for writing the open letter are in fact the party's policy, which, let me repeat, we're hearing that we're trying to attack the leadership because we are Saftu's enemy, that we want to collapse the federation and we want to destroy its unity. If in fact any of that is the party's policy, then you're the man who would know. What do you have to say to all of this?
Well, to start with, Comrade Sean, we are absolutely scandalized by the political level of the discussions taking place within the leadership. It is completely unbecoming of the leadership of a working class with this tradition, with the socialist consciousness, that language, such as the ones used by the leadership at the most senior level within NUMSA itself, talking about banning the Marxist Workers Party. I was banned by the apartheid regime, and that didn't stop me then from speaking out, as indeed was the case with thousands of others that were subjected to that kind of oppression by the apartheid regime. And those comrades who made those threats should be completely and utterly ashamed of themselves, because banning political organizations is firmly within the traditions of the apartheid regime itself, which banned the ANC and banned the PAC and drove the SACP underground. It has no room, there's no room in the workers' movement for that kind of discourse. Our focus is completely and without compromise on the principled matters, on the political matters, on the ideological challenges facing the working class. We are determined, as we always have been from the 1970s and 80s, to provide, as we understand it, the clarity from the lessons of history that the working class needs to be armed with in the struggle for the overthrow of capitalism and the socialist transformation of society. What we point out in the letter is that the root of the problem facing the working class at an ideological level is the fact that the leadership at the top within Saftu, and NUMSA in particular, was schooled in the Stalinist ideas of the SACP. And ordinarily, by the way, political methods flow from the politics of a particular organization. If you are infatuated, as the SACP, as the comrades who were schooled in the SACP are, with the ideas of the National Democratic Revolution, they would just as easily fall for the authoritarian traditions of Stalinism that entailed, in the case of Russia, by the way, the extermination of Bolsheviks, the complete destruction of the entire Central Committee that had led the October Revolution. And therefore we denounce in the strongest terms these personal attacks. These matters should be dealt with politically. And we are very happy to engage any one of the leaders who are leveling these political accusations against us to have a public debate in front of the membership on all the traditions of the working class, by the way, including the tradition of a workers' representative on a workers' wage, which we believe is not the case amongst many of these leaders, earning salaries that their own members can only dream of, but who feel themselves entitled to level the most scandalous attacks on fellow comrades who have gone through the struggle, as many of them indeed have. We are not questioning their credentials. What we do question is their understanding of the Marxism in whose name they are perpetuating these wrong ideas and these wrong organizational methods.
We could also quickly mention the origins of the Marxist Workers Party back in the late 1970s, when we were the Marxist Workers' Tendency of the ANC. There are definite historical echoes in what's happening now. That might be the best word for it. One of the comrades who founded the Marxist Workers' Tendency was the editor of the South African Congress of Trade Unions newspaper, a predecessor of Cosatu, which was aligned in exile to the ANC. Now, he wrote an internal strategy document calling on Saftu to give a lead to the developing workers' movement against apartheid. And in that document, he criticised the attitude of the ANC, of which he was a member, and the South African Communist Party, the attitude of their leaderships towards the trade union movement. It's available on our website, by the way. People can go and read it. But inside that document, in a fraternal way, constructive criticisms were openly raised. What happened? He was removed from his job. He and 3 other comrades were suspended from the ANC, and a few years later, without even a hearing, they were expelled from the ANC. So there's nothing new for our organisation in what we're hearing from some of the leaders in Saftu. It's just sad that some of those leaders are caricaturing these past anti-democratic methods that I've just mentioned, methods which go completely against the genuine democratic traditions of the workers' movement. Now, just to reinforce this point, I want to mention a pamphlet that appears on our website. It's called Revolutionary Trade Unionism. It's in reality a handbook for our activists in how to approach the task of building support in a principled and open way for revolutionary Marxist ideas in the trade unions. Now, in that pamphlet, we quote Trotsky from 1923. And the Marxists have, Trotsky said, I'm quoting now, no reason, either in their ideology or their organisation, to hide themselves behind the trade unions. They do not misuse the trade unions for machinations behind the scenes. They do not split the trade unions when they are a minority in them. They do not in any way disturb the independent development of the trade unions, and they support trade union struggles with all their strength. But at the same time, Marxists reserve the right of expressing their opinion on all questions in the working class movement, including the trade union questions, to criticise trade union tactics, and to make definite proposals to the trade unions which, on their part, are at liberty to accept or reject these proposals. The party strives to win the confidence of the working class, above all of that section organised in the trade unions. And that quote sums up our entire method, the method that runs through our open letter. Saftu, the leadership, is at liberty to accept or reject our proposals. Obviously, we've mentioned its almost overwhelming rejection. But a membership is equally entitled to accept or reject our proposals. And I must say that on that point, we're getting a far more favourable and positive response to the contents of our open letter from the ordinary workers and rank and file members of the Federation. Now, we're going to move on to something else that we deal with extensively in the open letter that we've not mentioned yet in the discussion, and that is the question of the Socialist Revolutionary Workers Party that was initiated by a section of the NUMSA leadership, I think in 2018. Now, we're clear that in our view, the South African Communist Party 2 grouping created the SRWP really is an obstacle to the emergence of a broader mass workers' party. In part 2 of the open letter, after explaining the agreement at Saftu's founding congress to begin a process towards the formation of a workers' party, we said the following, and I'm quoting, "It was only at this point that the SACP2 grouping began to rush the SRWP into existence with Comrade Jim as chairman. The zigzag from foot dragging to a sprint is explained purely by the South African Communist Party 2 groupings' desire to cut across any initiative that might come from Saftu and later the Working Class Summit. The facts are that the SRWP was created, if not in defiance of, then in complete disregard for, the resolution of Saftu's founding Congress to establish an inclusive party uniting workers, communities and youth. The SRWP's launch was not mandated either by Saftu affiliates or indeed NUMSA members or worker structures themselves. Far from aiding the process towards a mass workers' party, the SRWP has obstructed it. The SACP2 grouping in the NUMSA leadership have thus twice, first by an act of omission, the passive withdrawal of support for the ANC, and then by one of commission, the creation of the SRWP, stood in the way of the formation of a genuine democratic socialist mass workers' party. Now, again, it's fair to say we don't mince our words in any way there on our analysis of what the creation of the SRWP represents. So, Wiseman, I'll bring you in again. Is the SRWP our enemy in that case?
I think to build on the quote from Trotsky as I begin my answer to this particular question, let us quote what Marx said in the Communist Manifesto, that communists have no interests separate and apart from the working class itself. And it is in that spirit that we have engaged with the leadership of NUMSA even before the SRWP was formed, and sought to clarify the way forward for the working class in discussions with them. And in the expectation and in the hope that what would emerge out of our discussions would be a meeting of minds on the basis of the genuine ideas of Marxism for the struggle of the working class. Now, the reality, unfortunately, for the members of the SRWP is that they do not have the same insight into the processes that led to the formation of the SRWP that we have had, precisely because of the fact that we have always positioned ourselves within the movement in order to acquaint ourselves with the actual ideas that are being discussed, the actual organizational steps that are being taken, and to position ourselves to make the fullest contribution possible on the forward movement of the working class. The process of the convening of the Special National Congress, let us start there, was an expression of the volcanic anger of the NUMSA members who saw in the Marikana massacre the final breach of the tripartite alliance, who saw in it that continued membership of the tripartite alliance would make the leadership of NUMSA complicit in the political crimes that the ANC was committing with the political support of the SACP. This brought the leadership of NUMSA inevitably into collision with the tripartite alliance leadership. And they were obliged to respond to the pressure of their members by convening a Special National Congress in the minds of the overwhelming majority of the NUMSA members with the explicit aim of establishing a workers' party. Unfortunately, that workers' party did not emerge from the Special National Congress. The leadership concluded the conference with the position that NUMSA would not be supporting the ANC, but that it was up to the NUMSA members to decide who to vote for. We believe that that was a serious political mistake, that the party should have emerged out of the Special National Congress. Events moved on, and Saftu eventually was formed following the expulsion of NUMSA from the Federation, a development that was inevitable. but that constituted an organizational and even a political break, but not an ideological one, unfortunately, as far as the SRWP is concerned. And this is the unavoidable conclusion that one has to arrive at if one continues to evaluate the conduct of the leadership after that. The formation of Saftu led, as we indicated earlier, to the calling of a Section 77 general strike in April of 2018, and politically, the convening of the Working Class Summit. Unfortunately, by the time that the summit convened, in line, incidentally, and let's be very clear, that the convening of the Working Class Summit was in line with a resolution that had been adopted at the founding conference of Saftu to establish a political and ideological commission to map the way forward towards a workers' party. That was the political resolution adopted in April 2017. The leadership utilized, or basing themselves on that resolution, the Saftu leadership, and convened the Working Class Summit. But by the time the summit convened, the SRWP had already been formed. Now, it is a fundamental principle of democratic centralism. For example, when workers are involved in a general meeting to consider taking strike action, that a debate is held, a vote is taken, and the majority's view prevails. The minority is obliged to support the decision of the majority. What has happened with the formation of the SRWP is that its initiators disregarded the founding resolution of Saftu, disregarded and disrupted the attempt to implement the resolution in the form of the convening of the Working Class Summit. The conduct of the comrades at the summit was disgraceful. They disrupted commissions, demanding to be the scribe, demanding to be the rapporteur, demanding to be the chair. And when the delegates in the plenary session on the second day protested, Comrade Jim himself rose to his feet and threatened to walk out of the Congress. If that had happened, the Congress would have collapsed. We believe that that is an act that is not based in the best interest of the working class, to put it mildly. This time, the resolution enjoyed the support of 147 different communities who supported the initiative. Fortunately, and it is to his credit that Comrade Vavi intervened to stop that from happening, warning that collapsing the conference through a walkout would bring about a harsh judgment from history. The comrades of the SRWP continued with the plans to launch the SRWP with no relationship to Saftu, and in fact, no relationship even to its own membership. And we are appealing to the membership of the SRWP to apply their minds to the implications of what is developing here. The leadership is now confronted with this problem, that as a result of their failure in the elections, they need a scapegoat. And that scapegoat, unfortunately, has been Comrade Vavi, who has been under relentless pressure to swing the support of Saftu behind the SRWP. Correctly again, Comrade Vavi resisted on the basis that he does not have a mandate to do so. And for such kind of pressure to be exerted on the leadership of the Federation is itself profoundly authoritarian and undemocratic on the part of the NUMSA leaders within the SRWP. And we are calling upon the members of the SRWP to draw the conclusions from this. We fully support the call for a special National Congress. It is our view, the purpose of such a call is to direct the SRWP back into the Saftu process, to unite with the rest of the working class, to bring into existence a party capable of uniting the working class on a socialist program. across all the three main theaters of struggle, in the communities, in the education sector, and in the workplace.
To underline what you've just been describing, Wiseman, I mean, we say in the open letter, and I quote, that any genuine workers' leader should have been thrilled by the Saftu and Working Class Summit resolutions committing to help bring into existence a mass workers' party. They signalled the willingness of broader working class forces to be part of such a project, but the SACP2 grouping did not view it this way. Now, just to move on, we didn't come up with SACP2 as an insult, but because, as you've explained, Wiseman, we believe that the ideology and methods of the SACP are just being continued in the leadership of the SRWP. Now, let me be clear, we're not proposing a conspiracy that the SRWP is controlled by or a front for the SACP, but that those who went to school in the SACP are now leading the SRWP, and they still have their SACP matrix certificates hanging on the wall. Now, in the open letter, we talk about the idea of the National Democratic Revolution, which is at the heart of the South African Communist Party's ideology, and how we think that idea remains a central and guiding idea in the SRWP. Can you just explain for us, to us, Wisey, what the National Democratic Revolution is all about?
The National Democratic Revolution is not a socialist program. It's a program for the indefinite postponement of the socialist revolution. It is based on the idea that the workers must wait. It has led to catastrophic consequences for the working class internationally. The so-called block of floor classes that Stalin promoted in China led to a terrible defeat for the Chinese working class in Shanghai between 1925 and 1927. I can roll off many other examples. The defeat of the Indonesian workers in 1965, the defeat of the Spanish workers in the 1930s, the defeat of the Chilean workers in 1973, all of them are rooted in the false idea that the revolution must be postponed so that we can travel on this never-ending road called the National Democratic Revolution, whose essence is the preservation of the economic dictatorship of the capitalist class with the political support of the leaders of the labor movement. We are totally opposed to it. We are unapologetic supporters of the idea of permanent revolution that originated with Marx, by the way. And we advise comrades who have not read the address to the Communist League by Marx in 1850 to return to it, because resounding across the ages from that address is the experience which the working class is going through under the ANC government today, where the interests of the working class have been thrown overboard in order to promote the interests of an aspirant capitalist class that has not even been able to realize its own ambitions, let alone fulfill the promises to the working class of a better life for all. And it is for these reasons that we are appealing to the comrades. Let us engage in a debate about the lessons of history, about Marxism, about tactics, about the United Front, and most important of all, to reaffirm our understanding that all the evidence that has accumulated over the past 6 months alone, let alone over the past 100 years, demonstrate the absolute necessity for the overthrow of capitalism, which has demonstrated in a way over the past 6 months, like few events before it, the complete incapacity to meet even the most basic demands of the working class. The system is crying out to be overthrown, but it will not collapse on its own. The working class needs to be armed with a political party to do so. And it is our responsibility as revolutionary Marxists to provide the working class with the ideological armory, the lessons of history, the organizational know-how in order to organize themselves to overthrow capitalism and to begin the process of the establishment of socialism in South Africa, on the continent, and worldwide.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to draw this discussion to a close. And we'll finish by quoting the closing passages of our open letter. So to quote, Leon Trotsky explained that in the epoch of imperialist decay, the trade unions can be really independent only to the extent that they are conscious of being, in action, the organs of proletarian revolution. Saftu members will not be able to fully purge the policies of class collaboration and complete the journey to reclaiming their organisational, political and ideological class independence until they have consciously rejected the national democratic revolution, other Stalinist methods, Keynesianism and all other varieties of reformism, embraced genuine Marxism and made revolutionary trade unionism the official policy of Saftu. We go on to say, there must be a campaign within the Federation for the correct policies. Otherwise, workers will remain hamstrung by a leadership that zigzags around whilst empirically groping its way forward. We call on all those who have read this, and I'd add who've listened to this, and agree with our analysis to contact us to discuss the formation of a Marxist trade union network that sets itself the task of consolidating a genuine revolutionary current within the trade union movement. So I thank comrades Executive and Wiseman for taking part. Thank you for listening. If you want to contact us, the telephone number is 081 366 7375. That's 081 366 7375, or visit our website www.marxistworkersparty.org.za.